On June 11th, 2020, Square held a presentation to reveal several upcoming titles slated for release. Among these was a stylish-looking game featuring fluid parkour and combat that had my attention. Project Athia, working title. Looks neat, I thought. I kept it in the back of my mind and didn't think much of it. That is until March 18th of the next year when we were finally given a concrete name. Forspoken. Okay, cool. Fast forward again to the Game Awards at the end of 2022 and we get another trailer and the announcement of a demo that we were able to play right then and there. So I ran straight to the fridge so I could top off my tea and sit down and finish the show. After a few days, I did play the demo and so with the demo, do you remember going over to someone's house, a cousin or a friend, and they would want to show you a game, but the way they did this was by sitting you down, giving you the controller, and letting you run around the save file that they've already started, meanwhile they're giving you tips as you go on how to play? That's exactly what the Forspoken demo feels like. Combat is extremely confusing at first, and it only gets slightly better after you experiment with it yourself. The attacks and special attacks don't feel good to land, and the camera is a little too close to the main character. It honest to God felt like I was playing Final Fantasy 15. It gave off those vibes so hard, where the attacks felt like they kind of just floated out and had no impact to them, and I would only find out later that this is because they share the same engine, the Luminous engine to be precise. A few of the special moves were cool, and I look forward to mixing Traversal into the things that I can do in the full game. Traversal is cool overall, but the same issue occurred. It wasn't explained well enough, and I felt overwhelmed by the things that I didn't know how to do. The story made no sense to begin with, and this almost made me say, nah, I'm good for making a video on this game. But I feel like there's still something good to be dug out of this one. I want to give it the benefit of the doubt and give the full game a try. Maybe it got the updates and tweaks it needed in time for the full release. There's only one way to find out though, so if you're with me, this is Forspoken. Meet Frey, an orphan living on the streets of New York City. Her life, for lack of a better description, sucks ass. She's constantly having run-ins with the law and other individuals who mean to give her trouble. But then one day, some wacky circumstances see her getting whisked away to a magical world where dragons and monsters roam around. This is Athia, and Athia is currently dealing with a corruption known as the Break that seeks to destroy everything. It's already taken over Athia's previous 4 leaders, the Tauntas, powerful individuals that came together to uphold order and union from the 4 corners of the land. Frey finds refuge in the last remaining city, Sepal, and after making some friends and watching those friends get murdered in front of her by one of the corrupt Tauntas, Frey takes it upon herself to avenge these people. Thus, the journey is laid out. Hunt down the Tauntas to free them and Athia from the Break. The setup is kinda generic. I don't hate it, but I was never really invested. The only aspects of the story that actually had me interested were when Frey's backstory is brought up. She has the talking bracelet as a companion throughout the game, and their banter is entertaining enough, and yes, I know, the entire internet has been cringing and reeling from the dialogue in this game, but if you want my honest opinion, it's not that bad. It's eye-rolling at worst and chuckle-worthy at best.
Destruction and corruption are beautiful forms of creation in themselves.
I don't sound like that.
You absolutely sound like that.
No, no, you absolutely sound like that. Yeah, see? 2 can play at that game.
You're stupid.
I'm not the best person to analyze this type of thing, but I feel like the overly try-hard writing is less of a result of poor writing and more so attributed to Frey as a character. Like, she just is that type of person, overly confident and a loner because she shut herself off from everyone else. And when she gets the slightest bit of pushback, she pushes back even harder. She was abandoned as a baby and was forced to grow up with no stable figures in her life, constantly being thrown from foster home to foster home and eventually ending up on the wrong side of the law a few times. I don't know what that's like personally, but I would assume you'd have to grow some thick skin sooner or later. The scene at the beginning of the game where we see she really has nothing and literally cries herself to sleep bummed me the f out. And it's not so subtle at points with metaphors for suicide. Those are things that could always stand to be explored more in games, and I like Frey well enough to explore these things with her. But the stuff in Athia, I couldn't care less, man. The characters in Sepal, Cuff, the Tauntas, I don't care. None of it really grabbed me or interested me, so when it was getting towards the end of the game and this huge information dump on how things got so messed up, I just wanted it to be over. And unfortunately, I think that's pretty much how I feel about everything else. Frey's magical powers give her access to traversal-focused parkour, as well as offensive and supportive spells. Her parkour allows her to effortlessly traverse Athia, and for a while, it's pretty cool. Seeing all these fluid animations play out is something to behold. Leaping over all of these structures and bounding over these lush landscapes was constantly exhilarating. Frey even gets a few more moves to make traversal more interactive. Whipping off of posts or crystals is great for getting some major airtime, and I really like the icy skimboard you eventually get. It just stinks that I only used it like twice, and one of those was when you first get it. Now, that's probably because I just didn't explore Athia all that much. There wasn't a whole lot that interested me in this open world. All the side quests are dreadfully bland. It's your typical, this thing gives you some stat increase, this tower will show you the surrounding area, this is a combat challenge, here's a race you can do. I've seen all of this shit before, not to mention the peas and carrots these things give you. The minimal amount of experience you get from these is dwarfed by the main missions that give you thousands of points just for following the main path. One thing about the open world I did kind of enjoy are these little wells of mana that are strewn about. If Frey simply runs through them, they give her essentially skill points to unlock new spells, and on top of that, they also refilled her stamina, which let me parkour around longer without interruption, which I think the stamina meter is really dumb anyway. Why limit the use of parkour like that? All they did was cause me to sit in one spot on occasion, waiting for it to recharge. If Frey falls from a great height, it can cause fall damage, but that's dumb anyway. If you wanted to punish players for not parkouring correctly, falling off the high height and having to redo the climb is punishment enough. This just creates unnecessary limitations and pace breakers for the player. Parkour in tight spaces also doesn't work so good because Frey's really good at vaulting over nearby things, leading to her performing these animations when in corridors after barely touching the analog stick. This is at its worst in boss fights that need you to be precise and take cover behind something because the boss has a super accurate beam that Frey can't outrun. She has to make a beeline to the nearest wall or pillar to hide, but the parkour is so sensitive that she's constantly bobbing up and down, letting the enemy get hits off her while she's trying to decide if she wants to stop busting a move. Dodging attacks in general is so unintuitive. 80% of the attacks can be completely avoided by just hammering the circle button. Frey will defy logic and just phase through pretty much everything. There is a counter you can do if you can time the hit just right, but Frey is always moving around, so if the enemy hits you, you probably weren't expecting it in the first place in enough time to react. So I only performed the move when I remembered its existence and slowed down to do so. A lesser version can be performed a slight time after she gets hit, but it decreases your battle rank. Purple attacks need to be dodged, and red attacks are world-ending cataclysms that need to be ran away from, but it's not always consistent. Some red attacks need to be outran, and some just don't. It's not a problem that just Forspoken has had, of course, but it is a problem that the battlefield is so unreadable a lot of the time. And I think that's a good enough place to kickflip into combat. My biggest problem with combat is the same problem I had with Final Fantasy XV's combat. Attacks have no impact. Frey eventually has access to 4 different types of magic, 3 of which are projectiles, which can't help but make her entire arsenal feel a little redundant, but the other one is melee based. Each one of these types has one basic attack that you can throw out by tapping the right trigger. Also, side note, go ahead and turn off the adaptive triggers. They're a little too resistant for how much you'll be pressing it, and it makes combat feel even worse. But anyway, the basic attack is complemented by a heavy attack performed by holding down the trigger. This is where things get tricky. Each type of magic has multiple heavy attacks it can swap to. For example, the melee school has a giant sword slash, a lengthy fisticuff combo, which was my favorite, and a long-range exploding trident. And on top of that, each school has a whole wheel of supportive magic on the left trigger that you have to cycle through. For example, the wooden magic can bind enemies in roots, swipe with a giant root whip, lay down a flower turret, and like 3 others that I didn't even use. And each of the 4 schools have the same amount of spells, heavy attacks, upgradable moves, everything. Needless to say, it's a lot. Little did I know while playing the demo, I was only using half of what Frey could eventually do. And I thought that much was confusing. You're supposed to be swapping back and forth between all these heavy attacks and supportive spells in order to build up that battle ranking I mentioned a moment ago. The more you mix it up without taking any damage, the higher it'll climb and the more your experience will multiply at the end of the encounter. Essentially the Devil May Cry style ranking. But you'll also want to swap these spells out because enemies are vulnerable to specific schools of magic. Damage will be greatly increased if you use the correct school on them, so you're encouraged to do so on 2 fronts. Normally, I would be okay with this. My favorite character in DMC5 is Dante, and I love him because of all the complex moves he has, and how satisfying it is to switch back and forth between the stances and weapons. But the thing that makes Dante so satisfying is how consistent he feels. When the game gives you a new weapon, it actually feels like a powerful new tool to add to the kit. Attacks impact enemies and knock them back or do big damage. Frey's spells have the impact of throwing a dry sock onto the floor. Again, this is one of my main problems with 15 too. Attacks don't feel good to connect with at all, and it's the same way in Forspoken. Attacks that have decent visual impact don't do shit for damage, and the attacks that do decent damage look like they glide right through their targets. There are no good impact frames a lot of the time, and that can't help but make all these attacks feel lacking. Of course, there are exceptions like the root whip, the fisticuff combo, or the lightning dart attack, but that's 3 moves out of so many. I think the RPG number game is partly to blame too. You guys know me, I'm not a huge fan of victory or fun factor being dictated by having a bigger number than the thing you're trying to fight. I think God of War Ragnarok did a much better job of giving you the freedom to keep the equipment if you like what it does for you through the upgrade system. You have to go around and do these side quest dungeons to find better cloaks and necklaces so Frey isn't hopelessly outstatted in each area. And I'm not really a fan. I did play on the hard difficulty, but it helped me see how monotonous the combat system is. There was one fight about 6 hours in where I was fighting this enemy type called an ogre, along with an army of weak enemies. The ogre has an absurd amount of health and defense, so I was just running away from it and trying to destroy these lanterns so enemies will stop spawning. But the ogre has this red heel slam move that comes out so fast that I don't have time to react to it, and it killed me at the end of this long as hell challenge. That was the moment I broke, and I decided this game was not meant for me. Forspoken is the kind of game that a person who only plays like one game a year would like. If they're looking for a break from Assassin's Creed or Far Cry, the animations are slick enough to keep them visually engaged, and the accessibility options that make the game a walk in the park are just a button press away, ensuring that things never have to get too frustrating for the player that doesn't want to deal with poorly constructed systems. The world is big enough to keep that kind of player busy for months, and hopefully they would have enjoyed themselves by then. But for me, personally, I don't need to ever touch this game again. I'm glad I gave it a shot, but it's not interested in giving the player a fulfilling experience. The boss fights are all damage sponges that don't know when to die. I was even able to take an in-game nap in the middle of one boss fight and then resume it like nothing had happened. The camera is terrible when using melee magic because it stays way too close to Frey, and it's also terrible pretty much the rest of the time too. Parkour makes fights too floaty and evade heavy to be engaging. The game is nice to look at when running across these beautiful landscapes, but it's got holes in other places. These cars that just slide across the road in the opening New York scene, the laughable lip sync and lip movements in a lot of cutscenes, the questionable amount of frame dips when playing exclusively in performance mode. I think Frey's design is pretty cool. I'm a sucker for the everyday outfit with some flair. I also love the hairstyle, it's just cool as hell. There were some legitimately good performances peppered throughout the game, but it just had so many little issues that no amount of cool factor or brownie points could make me recommend it to you guys. There are games, for far less money I might add, that do everything this game does and more. I would recommend Spider-Man Miles Morales over this game. It does similar things, but in much better and more fulfilling ways. I hate that this year started off with less of a bang and more of a groan. Hopefully things will pick up after this. I will catch you guys soon with a hopefully better time. These boring games are always so boring to make videos on, ugh. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching. So thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.